I'm Bailey Parnell, and this is Let's Think This Through. Join me for drinks as I bring on guests for conversations that inspire, amuse, and challenge us, but in a fun and relaxing kind of way. Ultimately, it's to help us all learn and live a better, easier life. So let's think this through. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second to last episode of this season of Let's Think This Through with me, Bailey Parnell. I'm excited for you to hear this episode today because I've actually reconnected with somebody this year who I went to high school with a while ago. And in high school, we never really had any classes together. I think we know who each other was, but we weren't as close then. And we've been reconnected recently because she's now, among many things, a public speaker and a writer. And so the world has brought us back together. But she's also just someone who has a really unique and interesting story, one of which that has actually been captured in a memoir recently, which we will definitely get into. But she's a doctor, like a medical doctor, not my kind, in the other world, but medical doctor who very much has that side of her brain active all the time, but also a poet and also an artist and also a mother. So there's all these worlds that are overlapping in her perspective, which is why I think that you're really going to enjoy it. So today on Let's Think This Through, I am having drinks with my friend, Dr. Chika Oriuwa. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad we were able to reconnect again this year, and it just so happened to work out that I use this podcast as an excuse to chat with people that I want to catch up with.
I'm honestly so glad that we got to reconnect as well, and I mean, it's the perfect medium for us to catch up.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because you know what, you're one of those people where that inspired me doing this podcast in the first place, where our real life conversations that are not recorded, I always think, you know what, people would benefit from this. We should just record something like this. So that's why I started this in the first place.
I mean, it's perfect. I honestly, when I was looking through the kind of background and inspiration that you had sent over for what made you start this, I was like, that is so true. There are so many excellent nuggets of wisdom that we share with our girlfriends that it's like, man, we should be on like reality TV, or we should have our own talk show. And it's like, you're doing that. So that's great.
Yeah, exactly. So how are you introducing yourself to the people these days? Give us the nice bio.
So I often say that I'm Chika Oriuwa, Dr. Oriuwa. I'm a resident doctor in psychiatry. I'm a mother of two, a little boy and a little girl who are 3 years old and 19 months old. I'm a public speaker, an author, a poet, a passionate individual with a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and drive, and someone who is looking to change the world by changing our understanding of human connection. So that's what I'm really, really passionate about. And yeah, I'm a big talker. So it's a surprise that I don't have a podcast, but it's not surprising that I'm on so many podcasts.
Yeah. Well, listen, that's a great introduction. I feel like you have done this before. So yeah, it's funny when some of my friends are like, yeah, I'm just living life, and I happen to know their entire extensive resume. So I'm like, is that all? It's like, yeah. No, but I think that gives a really good introduction to the kinds of topics I want to catch up on today.
Yeah.
What are you drinking?
So, glad you asked. I have here my favorite mug. Not my favorite spoon, but one of my spoons. And I have my favorite teapot. And I am drinking an organic chai, I believe. And I steeped it because that's how I prefer all of my teas are steeped. And I'm going to pour it. Yeah,
Gosh,
so that's what I'm drinking.
Like ASMR.
I know.
Pour it again. Okay, give us the finish. Okay, show us higher.
I'm sorry.
Looks great. How serious are you about your tea?
I've become a lot more serious. I won't lie. That's actually was one of my New Year's resolutions or New Year's intentions.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, is that I think, and through the research that I've been doing to curate my new keynote, one of the most important things that we can do is to find goals, hobbies, interests that are not tied to any kind of career goals or like just things that we can be truly fascinated about. And it's my way of trying to understand myself, what just naturally piques my curiosity, and what do I find fascinating that isn't at all related to my role as a mom or a doctor or a poet, or just like who am I? And I found that I really love teas. And so for Christmas, my husband Dale got me an assortment of different teas from this, like, I guess, tea collection store. I don't know. And I have found that I really love teas, and I really love different kinds of teapots and teacups. And so I've been like watching YouTube videos on like teapot collections and finding the best ways to steep teas to get the best results. And so I'm now really getting into it. And I think that's going to be my fun hobby outside of all the other stuff that I do, is like tea stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Having something that's not for capitalist aims. Or sometimes, we take things that we really do like, and maybe even something like poetry would be a good example, where it can easily find its way into the world of work as opposed to the world of a hobby. So I imagine you have to balance crossing that over.
Yes. I mean, I've been like also listening to a lot of other female entrepreneurs and realizing that it's like, there are real opportunities to monetize things that you are good at, or things that you might be doing for free already. And I'm realizing that, oh yeah, it's excellent to be able to realize when there's an entrepreneurial opportunity, but there are also some things that should be protected. And as someone who has definitely monetized my art in a lot of ways, that has not always, but in some ways diminished the joy that I reap from that, there are things that I want to protect, and my burgeoning love for teas and all things tea will be protected. I don't want to monetize that.
Yeah, Hamza and I have talked about that too, where even myself, like I have felt, you almost sometimes feel guilty for having a hobby that's not commoditized. And it's like, am I using my time wisely? Or am I, like, maybe I should do something. And then at the same time, it's not always guilt. Sometimes it's just an actual perspective on the world, which is like, if I enjoy this much, other people must too. And I should turn it into a business. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But I mean, I think that also speaks to I don't want to say like the dangers of productivity, but definitely kind of the dangers of being in a hyper-capitalistic environment, where it's like, if you do anything for rest or even enjoyment, just pure enjoyment, and it's like not in service to other people, nothing, just for you, it's like, oh my gosh, well, you shouldn't be doing that. When in reality, like, that is actually critical. That is central to our wellness, to our ability to be able to give back and pour into others. We first must be able to pour into ourselves. And that is something that I have learned to be really unashamed about only in the last few years, since becoming a mother and realizing that I went from giving myself very selflessly as a doctor, giving 110%, and then shifting gears to becoming a mother, and then giving 110% to my children. And then realizing for most of my life, I never gave back to myself because I thought that was a selfish thing. But now I'm learning that it is not selfish to find things that you are passionate about, and to rest and read a book and do things that aren't directly tied to the service of other people, but is in service to yourself and to your soul. And that's equally as important.
Yeah, underscore that. I feel exactly the same. And it's a paradigm. It's like a mental paradigm. You could even say like if you want to go so far, like a colonization of thought about how we view our value to society. And it's not the same everywhere else. Like, you and I are based in North America, but I know that you've also been places where it really is not that way elsewhere. Like, to sit and to rest and to be with a family or to do something for yourself is just considered like part of the norm.
It's just normal.
Yeah.
I know. But here, and I think especially, there's a fine balance that we need to strike, especially as women, right? Because I think that there is something really beautiful about being a woman who's out there and, taking on the world in the ways that we are, and we're, doing incredible things, and we're hustling, and, like there is a certain element of pride, and, really that's great. And at the same time, it's such a fine balance between like, I want to do all these great things, but I also want to protect that element of softness. And that doesn't mean that I'm not an amazing mother and an amazing career driven person. It doesn't mean all these other things. it's not mutually exclusive. It can coexist. But how do I protect that space without all of the guilt and all of the false narratives that we tell ourselves whenever we want to sit down and rest? And it's funny because I realized, or it didn't really strike me until I had my cousin come over and we were having lunch, and she was seated and I was standing, and my kids were both at school, but even still, I was standing and I was like shoveling the food in my mouth. And she was like, "You're making me anxious. Can you just sit
Yeah.
down and eat?" And I was like, "What? Like anxious for what?" She's like, "Why are you standing?" And I was like, "Why am I standing?" And it was because I was like so normalized to eating my food so quickly so that I can go back to being productive. And I didn't realize that I was actually internalizing a bit of shame, actually sitting and enjoying and savoring my meal.
Yeah, right. And it's a good example because it's something that probably sneaks up on you. It doesn't just happen one day. But let's take it all the way back to where we met. So for everyone listening, Chika and I actually went to high school together, and we didn't really have any classes together, so we weren't as close then. That's what we mean by reconnecting this year. But we also both grew up in Brampton, Ontario, which is just about 45 minutes or so outside of Toronto. So what stands out for you while growing up in Brampton?
Oh my goodness. Brampton.
I
Wow.
don't even know why I'm laughing. It's just Brampton's
Well,
great
it's
and
funny
funny.
because I feel like I ran away from Brampton at 17 and I've never moved back, and I'm 31 now. So like, I always want to give gratitude to the city that raised me. Like I spent most of, my life thus far in Brampton, and so I give gratitude for it to that, but it was, at least at the time in the 90s and the early 2000s when we were there, it wasn't the most inspiring place to be. And, it by all accounts, it was a safe place to grow up. There wasn't a wild amount of diversity in Brampton growing up. And I say that as a young, when I was there, I was a young, dark-skinned Black girl in predominantly white Catholic school, elementary school, Catholic high school, our same high school, St. Thomas Aquinas. And then, definitely when I left Brampton, I mean, I went to Hamilton, so I won't lie, it was pretty much more of the same. But then when I went to Toronto, and
Right, right.
I've been living in Toronto for 10 years this year, which is wild to think of. 2015 is when I moved to Toronto. And it's been a much more, culturally diverse experience, much more opportunity to connect with different groups and perspectives of life. But I would say that unfortunately, or, interestingly, my academic journey has been unchanged from when I was like in kindergarten to now. Like pretty much it's been predominantly white since I started school in Brampton.
Yeah, and that's really interesting perspective because I think that the school and the schooling experience and being studious and involved, that was, a big part of what we did every day growing up in Brampton. And I think probably part of that was because of the Catholic school system, right? Like, because other people would consider Brampton, I think literally at one point it won most diverse city in the world or something like this. But it didn't feel like that because of where we spent all of our time. And as you noted, we're predominantly white institutions. And it's definitely even changed since the time. But
Yes.
I left when I also left at 17 and didn't go back either. And I resonate with what you say that back then it didn't feel inspiring, but I think, it did create us. So like I hear the gratitude that you also give. When
Yes.
you were growing up in Brampton, where'd your parents grow up?
My parents grew up in Nigeria. So my parents are Nigerian, we're Igbo, and so they grew up in Owerri State Owerri in Imo State. Please, Nigerians, don't come for me. It's so confusing to answer this question sometimes. But they are Nigerian, and they both grew up through the Biafran civil war in Nigeria. So they're both survivors. They were both children at the time. And my parents actually met in Canada. So they emigrated from Nigeria in the 80s. They met while they were both in Montreal, because that was a common landing place for a lot of Nigerian immigrants. So there's a really big Nigerian community in Montreal, and they got connected there. And then they had myself and my 3 siblings, and I'm the third of 4. Yeah, we settled in Brampton.
Yeah. What was that like growing up as a first gen in Canada?
It was interesting. I say that as a Nigerian Canadian individual, it's difficult at times because you feel like you are not entitled completely to either identity, right? So, I'm not Canadian enough for the Canadians, because the Canadians never think that I'm actually, born in Canada, even though I was born in Ottawa. They're always asking, where were you born? How long have you been in Canada? And, it's never presumed that I'm Canadian. And then the Nigerian community, I've never been back to Nigeria, which is something that, I do feel a lot of shame and guilt about, but it was never an opportunity that I had growing up to go back with my parents. And since I've been in medical training and then having my kids and whatnot, the time hasn't been opportune. And so I've never been to Nigeria. I can understand bits and pieces of the Igbo language, like I've probably 60%, but I can't speak it. I can't speak it at all. And so even though I'm very much deeply connected to my culture, the food, the music, the community, I'm very enmeshed within the Nigerian culture, I'm still not Nigerian enough, because they'll speak to me in Igbo, and if I don't respond in Igbo, it's like, you've never been to Nigeria. And, there's just a lot of guilt tripping around it. And so not Nigerian enough for the Nigerians, not Canadian enough for the Canadians. And so you have to try and find your own identity. And then, of course, being a Black woman in North America, you become racialized in a way that you wouldn't be racialized in other parts of the world. And so here I am just a Black woman in the eyes of other individuals who are not a part of the Nigerian community. And so that experience of having these identities, I'm a Black Canadian, I'm a Nigerian Canadian, I'm Canadian, what does that even mean? And then trying to navigate that, feeling, a part of certain groups, but then not really part of other groups. And then also having to confront all of the things that come with sexism and racism, and growing up at the intersection of both of those different kinds of discrimination. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like whether it wasn't even really your choice, but that identity and exploring parts of your identity was a central theme from the minute you were surrounded by, in growing up in Brampton in a white part of the city. It's like, well, now I know I'm different, and now all these other things are telling me that I have identities that are making me different. I can see why this comes up. Obviously, the exploration of identity comes up a lot in your work and your poetry and your writing.
Yes, absolutely. And, some of the earliest memories I have, which I actually wrote about in my memoir, Unlike the Rest, A Doctor's Story, I talk about how growing up in Brampton, I vividly remember being in elementary school and having the students make remarks, racial slights about my name, making fun of my name, making fun of my features, saying that my nose was too big, or that my lips were too big, and that, all of the different, ironically now, making fun of the different things that is now seen as conventionally desired when it's not on a woman of color, when it's not on a Black woman, like having fuller lips or having, a fuller body type. The things that I was certainly, made fun of for when I was growing up, and then now looking around and it's just like, oh, but you guys do consider that beautiful, just not on someone that looks like me. Okay, got it. So, these things definitely etched an indelible mark in me and into my psyche that took many, many years of therapy to undo. And just, self-realization and really taking back the power of my own understanding of who I am, that I get to define who I am, and that can't be defined based on any of these other metrics that people try and push me into.
Yeah, and that's really, empowerment at its finest. I think that's why you can be a role model to anyone, really. Like literally anyone who's trying to understand what was imposed on me that was not me, and where can I take back my story. But so you get out of Brampton though, and you go to Hamilton for medicine. But why medicine? Like, where did that come from?
So it's interesting. So I went to Hamilton for Mac for my undergrad, and then I did medicine at U of T. And so, I mean, I've wanted to be a doctor my entire life. And so I first realized that I wanted to be a doctor when, yes, I first realized I wanted to be a doctor when I was 3 years old, like long before I even had any concept of the brutally early mornings, the painfully long nights,
Right.
what it felt like to be in the operating room as, we're excising out a tumor or delivering a baby, or what it felt like to be in palliative care and hold someone's hands as they take their final breaths. Like, I had no idea what medicine had in store for me. All I knew was that my uncle, my mom's brother, who resides in the States, so I didn't get to see him all that often, but he was still very close to our family. He's a neonatologist. And in my 3-year-old mind, I distilled that down to being, he spent his entire day playing with babies, full stop. That was it. I was obsessed with babies when I was 3 years old. I still am, clearly.
Clearly, yeah.
Very obsessed. But I was so obsessed with babies that I would look forward to family gatherings and community parties, and I would scour the room until I found a newborn, and I would wake them up out of their little things and I would hold them. Like, I was just so obsessed. So for me, it was medicine or bust. And I consider myself fortunate such that as I went through elementary school and high school, I realized that the foundations of what makes an astute doctor is what I was naturally inclined towards, like what I would say, like those are my natural gifts. So science, math, anything that had to do with numbers, but I also really loved English. And the reason why I say that this is so critical to my ability to be a good physician is because I grew up also as a poet, as a writer. I was not a theater kid in high school, but I took all the drama classes. Like, I love being on stage. I love connecting with an audience. And I think that all of these things, from the biology to the math to the art to the English, it all came together to make me what I believe is the best doctor that I could be. And the reason why I say that is because in order to be a good writer, to be a good poet, and to be a good doctor, you need to be able to leverage your skill of human connection, tying back into humanity, and also being able to assess the world in an unflinching way. And all of these different skills enabled me to do that. And so I just considered myself fortunate that as I went from Brampton to Mac for my undergrad, which I did health sciences, and then eventually went to U of T to do medical school, and I concurrently did my master's in leadership and innovation. It all just, the thread through was always there.
I see that. And even with the obsession with babies, you chose psychiatry, right?
Yes.
Why?
So, I mean, it will come as no surprise that I wanted to be an obstetrician when I started medical school for the sole reason that I wanted to deliver babies. And you might be thinking, like, why didn't you want to be a pediatrician? So I did want to be a pediatrician initially. And I was like, between peds and OB, I realized very quickly, though, that it was hard for me to see babies like very ill, or like I just found that
right?
part. Yeah, I found that part to be really quite heartbreaking. And then I thought, like, how joyous is it to be able to bring a baby into the world every day? Like, and then you get to see them, and like, it felt really fun. And as I got through medical school, I realized more and more that I was really fascinated by the physiology. I really loved neuroscience. I found it fascinating. And when I was preparing for my electives in my 4th year, which will enable me to get letters so that I can apply to the residency, it was just 2 weeks before I was set to start my electives that I did my rotation in inpatient psychiatry. So it literally was not on my radar at all. Zilch, zero. However, when I did it, I felt it was like a whirlwind romance. Like, If you imagine someone at the altar holding hands with obstetrics and gynecology, and then psychiatry just bursts through and they're like, wait, I object. It was literally that. I was ready to commit my life to OB, and then I absolutely loved the patient stories. I was fascinated by the neuroscience. I mean, I always knew that I loved the brain, but I was captivated by how we were able to understand the brain medicine, but also like the psychological elements and tying in all the different aspects of someone's personhood, which is very unique to psychiatry, right? Like you get to do a deep dive into who they are, not just what they're presenting with. And what I also really loved about psychiatry is that you have the profound privilege of caring for someone's story. And as a natural storyteller, as a natural like writer, artist, poet, I felt the most like an artist when I was in psychiatry. I had the privilege of being able to sit with this patient for an extended period of time, go and speak with their family, friends, caregivers, whoever can provide collateral information. You get this behemoth amount of information about a patient, and it's our job to synthesize that into a coherent narrative that tells the patient's story. And that to me was like, oh, I'm a writer again. I'm an artist again. What a privilege it is to be able to care for this patient's story in this way and relay that information to other caregivers. Now, of course, there's also all the fun neuroscience, all the fun understanding of all of that. And so that has also really informed now my public speaking, which is predominantly on looking at the power of human connection, authentic leadership, and different elements of ingenuity through the lens of neuroscience.
That makes sense. I think that, someone like you would be just the kind of person that you want in psychiatry that understands, that medical side of it, but actually has all this skill and insight into other ways of being, but also other ways of looking at the world, right? That sort of the way that an artist and a writer sees the world is quite different. And I actually think that would provide you an edge in psychiatry.
Absolutely. And you'll find a lot of, it's funny because I've heard from other people that like all the, not weird, but quirky, like the quirky med students end up in psychiatry. And I think what they mean by that,
you're going to have to explain that one. Because I don't trust anyone's definition of quirky.
Right, exactly. But I think what they mean by that are like the med students who are brave enough to be themselves, who are brave enough to be authentic, who are usually a bit more creative, maybe have like some, idiosyncrasies that it's just, they're just themselves. And I feel like you find your community in psychiatry for sure. And they always say in medical school, like find your people. You'll go and you'll rotate through all the specialties. And when you're in each specialty, it's an opportunity to find your tribe, find your group. And I knew when I was in surgery that I loved the feeling of like scrubbing in and holding a scalpel, and I loved doing sutures, and I loved the OR, but the environment, the culture of surgery, at least in the hospital that I was based, and I won't mention the hospital, but at least in the hospital where I was placed, I was like, oh, y'all are not about to scream at me at 3:00 in the morning. That is just not, you are not going to tell me that I will leave the hospital at like 8 p.m. And this actually happened to me where I was asked to come in for rounding at 5 a.m. And if you start rounding at 5 a.m. as a medical student, you have to get there an hour before to pre-round. And so I arrived at the hospital at 4:00 in the morning. Only to find out that the fellow or the resident had told everyone else in the group, never mind, we're just going to keep rounds at 7 and I'll see you all tomorrow. But he forgot to message me. So I woke up at 3:00, was in the hospital by 4 a.m. doing rounds. And then I was like, where is everyone? And they were like, oh, so sorry. Everyone will be there in a couple of hours. But since you're already there, thanks for getting started. And that's when I was like, you know what? Love the practice of surgery. Don't love the culture of how I felt at that space at that time. I have to be very specific because I don't think all surgeons approach, treating medical students in that fashion. But it is unfortunate when you only have one time to be exposed to a specific, surgical environment for 4 weeks and that's it. So
Yeah. Well, in a way, you're just like, got to trust the universe at that point that it, taught you the right lesson. But it
yes,
sounds like the people that end up in psychology, dare I say, are unlike the rest.
I would definitely say they are, definitely different. I would say that the best dressed doctors, like 100% hands down, are the psychiatrists. Like, don't play with the psychiatrist fit because it is on point every single time. Let me tell you.
Okay,
So,
so
and that,
everyone, if you don't know, Chica's book is called Unlike the Rest.
yes, yes,
So
yes,
this is making now it's all making more sense, isn't it?
yes.
So this is the experience though. Like these experiences are the ones that inspired the book. Is that right?
Yeah, so the book was definitely inspired. It's funny because I was approached when I was in my third year of medical school by HarperCollins, an editor at HarperCollins, asking me if I wanted to write a story about the story of my life. And I've always wanted to write a book. I always thought it would be fiction, not nonfiction. And if it were to be
Interesting.
nonfiction, I would have never thought in a million years I would write about my life. I just didn't think it was going to be me. But when I was in medical school, I gained quite a bit of public attention, I guess you could say, because I was the only Black medical student in my class of 259 students in 2016 in downtown Toronto. So it was quite jarring for the world to realize that these kinds of issues still persisted. And I had done a lot of advocacy work.
Another space where you see the, two worlds, because Toronto is another city that's been literally most diverse in the world before,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
what spaces are you in? And this is a very different experience than, what's put out there.
Exactly. I mean, and I say this all the time when I'm keynoting or doing any kind of public speaking, is that it was jarring for everyone, but it was especially jarring for me. One of the main reasons why I chose U of T was because they had a Black Medical Student Association. And out of the medical schools that I'd gone into, it was the only one that had a Black Medical Students Association. Now, it was U of T, so I was drawn naturally just to the prestige and the standing of the medical school. I'm from Brampton, as we know, and so I wanted to be close by. I didn't want to go to a medical school that was far away from my family. So all of the different stars aligned. And I had also just finished my undergrad at Mac, where I was the only Black student in my class of 200 in the health sciences, in the health sciences class of 2015. So I was so eager to go to a space where I felt like I didn't have to deal with the politics of race per se, or at least not to the extent that I would have to deal with if I was the only one. Now, I realized on my very first day that was the case. And so I did a lot of advocacy work around improving the equity in the medical admissions process. And that led to quite a bit of media attention for me in medical school. I then started to do a lot of public speaking, writing poetry about it, performing poetry about it, giving speeches. And that has then catapulted into this entirely different career where, I've always loved public speaking and I always did public speaking, but now I had the opportunity to do it in a different way, different platform. And so I started to do a lot of international public speaking and, all throughout medical school as well. And so it got the attention of this editor, and he asked me if I wanted to write the memoir about my story. And now that was in 2019. So almost exactly 6 years ago, April 2019. And, at that time, from when I got approached by him, 2019, to when I signed the book deal, 2021, a week before I found out I was pregnant, to when I actually wrote and finished the book, which was last year, 2024. So much had actually transpired that it's like what was once just going to be a story about, me as a medical student, then became me as a resident, a mother, an actual doctor, as someone who ended up having a Barbie who was in Time magazine. Like, there's just so many things, became valedictorian. There were so many things that transpired in those years since he originally approached me, that it's like, oh, now I have a lot to write about. So happy to put it all down in a book. Yeah.
Because then you also get into the field, right? And you start
Yeah.
seeing, and I just know from our conversation, you start seeing these injustices and discrepancies between
Yeah.
what's happening in the field, but then also between people in the field and outside the field, like in a strange way. Like, what are some of the injustices or discrepancies that you started to notice even after school?
Well, you know, I was always really profoundly aware of the way in which privilege and social access either begets further privilege and social access or significantly impairs one's ability to climb the ladder of success, I guess you can say, within the world. And I realized that even when I was, coming out of high school, where I would say it wasn't, at least for me, maybe you could speak to it differently, but I felt like, yeah, I knew that there were some kids that had more money than my family, but I didn't feel like the wealth gap was as significant. Maybe that's because we were all in a Catholic publicly funded high school. But when I went to university and realized that at least like half of my friends in health sci at Mac were private school educated. And
Wow.
I was like, is private school even like a real thing? That was what I thought when I got there. I'm like, people really go to private school? My mind was blown. I was like, people actually do, like, that's not just like in the movies. And then when I came to medical school, where literally it was overwhelming, like everybody went to private school. And that's when I was like, wow, like I didn't even know that I was being barred from certain opportunities. And as I was in my undergrad and as I was in medical school up until I think like my first or second year, I was a private tutor as well on the side. And I was a private tutor predominantly for private school kids because I was with an agency, and the people who could afford private tutoring for the rate that the agency was charging were private school kids. And so she would send me out to these like gated communities in Toronto. And I remember sitting with these kids in their like palatial homes that were just like opulently draped. And I remember sitting there and doing the work with them. And they all had like these really interesting techs and gadgets, and seeing what the things that they were learning and how they were learning and the resources and the extracurriculars. And I remember just sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, I couldn't even go to Kumon. Like what is happening here? I can't believe the opportunities, the privilege, just everything that these kids have set up. And I also this also dawned on me when I was in medical school, and when I was in my undergrad, and I realized that the people who were trying to get into med school, like we all kind of were in my program. And one of them had research papers published with like top ranking surgeons when he was like in grade 9. And I didn't even know that I needed to do research for medical school until I was in my third year of university. And I was like, how did you even get set up? And it's like, oh, my dad's a doctor. Right, and then you go and you realize that a lot of people who become physicians are children of physicians. That was like a good chunk of my medical school class as well. So their access, their social access, the privilege, the financial privilege, like it is just a different world that I had no idea about until I entered into it. Now, that explains part of the reason why I was the only Black medical student. That has a huge driving reason towards it. And as I was doing my advocacy work around this, a lot of the pushback I would hear was, well, if Black people were smart enough, they would just get into medical school. Or maybe no Black people want to be doctors. I'm like, that's not true. I know lots of Black people that want to be doctors, and we're losing them to the States. That's where they're going, or they're going elsewhere, you know? Or, there's just so many different intersecting factors, systemic racism being one of them, such that it, again, privilege, access, all of these different things, the ways in which the communities are disadvantaged from an economic perspective, from the perspective of criminal justice, from the perspective of healthcare, like huge glaring issue, you know what I mean? So it doesn't come as a surprise. This is not coincidental that there was only one Black medical student, or that the historical average at U of T was between 0 and 2 or 0 and 1. Like it wasn't a coincidence. And so I'll say this now, that as a resident now in psychiatry, recognizing that these disparities persist in every area of medicine, when it comes to the racial disparities, when it comes to the outcomes, when it comes to, recognizing who has the ability to access good health care. What does good health even mean? What does mental wellness mean? What does physical wellness mean? And how different communities are affected. I mean, it's just, there's a lot to unpack.
I think that's one that you've spoken a lot about, is, or maybe just a lot me. I don't know. But you talked about the mental health and or you know what, let's say the lack thereof
Yeah.
of people who work in the medical field. I always
Yeah.
thought that was very interesting. But then also on top of that, the intersection with being a woman in the medical field.
Yes.
So
Oh my
what's
goodness.
going on? Are the women in healthcare all right? Like, tell us what's going on.
Um, I want to say not really. Like it definitely, being in medicine as a person of color is a challenge. Being in medicine as a woman in and of itself has its challenges. And I can go on all day talking about how it is that not only do we have to encounter, discrimination and sexism on your daily basis within medicine. But the research also shows that, and this is research, don't come at me, male doctors, but the research shows that female doctors report that like we are sorry, let me rephrase that. Female doctors, on average, tend to be better doctors in the sense that when it comes to surgeons, female surgeons tend to have better outcomes, less complications, better patient
I
rapport.
didn't know that.
Yes, yes. When it comes to female physicians in general, that patients tend to report receiving better care when they, have a female physician. Now, I keep a squad of female doctors, and I keep it deep. And let me tell you, I love every last one of my doctors. And not to say that male physicians can't be compassionate and nurturing and, have more of the softer skills that you might traditionally align with a woman. That's not the case. There's some many, many, many incredible male doctors, but the research shows what the research shows. So there's just that. However, at the same time, I think that when we look at female physicians, especially female physicians who have children or who grow their family, and then you see the ways in which their careers are unfairly impacted compared to their male colleagues. I have had many a heated discussion about this, especially as someone who I have two children, very, very close in age. I'm still in my training, and having made the decision to step back from my training in order to grow my family, I should be graduating this year. I won't be graduating for another 4+ years. And seeing how, a lot of my male colleagues can take a 2-month mat leave, a 1-month or pat leave, and, knowing that their female counterparts will shoulder a lot more of that burden. And then when you also recognize that traditionally speaking, the moms, even if they are working full time, even if they are, career moms, working moms, they still disproportionately shoulder the burden of household responsibilities, household management, the mental load of motherhood that I go when I am back in the hospital, when I see my other female residents and I see that between patient calls, they are calling summer camps for their children, trying to get them enrolled.
Right.
Yes, I have so many doctor mom friends who you see them doing all the mom things while they're also trying to do all the doctor things. And I can assure you that not for all dads, but for many dads, you will find that their work time is their work time. And maybe they'll come home and they'll be incredibly attentive fathers and spouses and da 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 da. But for moms, there is not that clear delineation often. And if a child gets sick, who's most likely to go and be with the child? It's usually the mom that takes time off work. Sorry, I digress.
No, but this is what you're seeing, and I think that most of my listeners are not a doctor in the field observing what happens,
Yeah.
in real time. And
Yeah.
I think it's like, so also for everyone listening, just so you know, Chika and I are in our 30s. Like when she's saying she stepped away from residency to do a family, it's not like you have an indefinite amount of time to go start a family. So when she's saying that, like, or like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the majority of women are kind of choosing, like, am I ever going to have a family, or am I going to step away from residency? Like, it's not like that's what it seems like, pretty big decision.
It is a huge decision. And what we are now seeing, actually, sadly enough, and this is what is another bone of contention that I kind of have with the field of medicine, is that the pendulum has almost swung the other way now, where there feels like there's a lot of pressure to just finish your training first and then go and try and have a family later. So there's a lot of pressure to, freeze your eggs and, give yourself options and choices and prioritize your career. And all of that is amazing. It's all great. We want to give women the option to choose what they want to do with their body. I think that is phenomenal, and we should protect that, and we should give them the resources. And at the same time, we're now seeing that a lot of women who delay their fertility or delay their family planning to when they're older and done residency. And keep in mind, residency can be anywhere from, if you do family medicine, it can be 2 years in Canada. But if you do another kind of specialty and then you do subspecialty training, that could take anywhere from 5 to 7 years. Like, right. if I did not choose to have my children, it would take me 7 years to finish all of my training after I finish medical school, which already was 4 years after my undergrad, which was 4 years after high school. So I would not have been done my training until I was in my mid 30s. And I just was not willing to delay my experience of motherhood until that point in time. And that was a personal choice. That's a personal decision.
Well, but I'm sure you just said it, right?
Yeah.
You want to support the choices of women, but it sounds like, what's happening is actually not supporting the choice to do it earlier or to do it before, what do they say? Like, you're 35, you're geriatric in terms of the fertility or something?
I literally was told that. I think I was getting a massage and my RMT, because I was like, I think I might want to expand my family this year. And he's like, oh, you have time? And I'm like, yeah, like I'm 31. And he was like, yeah, he's like, you're good until 35 and then it's geriatric. And I was like, okay, we have got to stop using this term. Let's stop calling it geriatric pregnancies. Like, come on.
But I think it's a good point, though, which is that there are risks that happen after 35, and there's other things to be cared for. But in the medical field, women who are saying, you know what, I don't feel like taking that risk. I would like to do it time, like we said, there's a biological factor here. So sure. But that choice is not being supported. Funnily, like that choice to be like, you know what, yes, we would like women to procreate.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes.
How do we also keep them as doctors? Like that's not being supported.
It's interesting because, when I found out I was pregnant the first time, there's a lot of support in many ways. I would say that it was hard at times to get certain accommodations while I was a pregnant resident, which is its own story on itself. But then when I got, well, suffice to say, as I mentioned earlier, I was quite sick in my pregnancies. And, what's also jarring is that female residents have disproportionately higher risk of experiencing a pregnancy loss just from the stresses of residency and sleeplessness and the demands and da. And I knew that from the beginning, and I was like, yo, I am taking that accommodation as soon as I can. And when I got the formal letter from my family doctor, spoke with my program director, had the other office that was involved for the residents, everybody was aligned, and it needed to go back to this specific specialty rotation because I was off service. So I was not on psychiatry. I was on another medical specialty service. And I had relayed to them all of my accommodations, and they just flatly said no. They just flatly said no, which was not allowed. They were supposed to be like, oh, you have all of the things that you're supposed to have. You should get them. So there was so much resistance and pushback that when they finally implemented some of the accommodations, I still remember being like, I don't know, 11, 12 weeks pregnant or something. And I had just finished my abbreviated call shift. So I was done at 11. I got to go home and I got called back at like 3:00 in the morning. And they were like the call switchboard operator. They were like yelling at me. They're like, where are you, Dr. Oriuwa? Your patient is in distress. Like it was so bad that I had to like get up and actually manage this throughout the night, even though I had accommodations where they were supposed to have activated someone else on call. So it was very frustrating from that perspective. But where I really got a taste of it was when I got pregnant again with my daughter while I was on my first mat leave, LOL. And she, I was very, they were very, very close together, biggest blessing in the world. But I found out that because I had not taken enough time to go back to residency, I was not eligible for any kind of like EI, like what you're supposed to get from a mat leave. So although my program was like, oh yeah, we'll top up whatever you get from the government was like, we're not giving you anything. And so you can't top up nothing. And so I got nothing. And I was like, oh, so when they say like you have choice to go and be a mom and, you know, and do these things and have a career, what they really mean is like, you can have your family, but if you don't do the family planning in the way that's conducive to your training or the training system, then we're not really going to make it very financially possible for you. So there's a lot of pressures to have your kids in a certain way in residency. And then for a lot of my friends who have decided to delay residency or to delay their family planning and finish all their training, I have heard so many unfortunate stories where they are now really significantly struggling with their fertility in their, you know, mid to late 30s when they're done all their training. And, you know, some expressed regret at, I wish I had just prioritized this and not placed such a huge emphasis on bulldozing through my training so that I can, you know, kind of have this career. And so I say all of that to say that there needs to be better systems to support the women who want to grow our careers and also be mothers. I don't feel like there should be a shame around wanting to be present for our children, and there should not be a shame for wanting to pursue a career that we've dedicated our lives to.
Underscore that. Okay, we'll just let it breathe there for a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
But on every episode, I bring a thought experiment out,
Yes.
and it's kind of blue sky related to what we're talking about, but without the constraints of reality. So
Okay.
I sometimes will just write to people like, blue sky, no limitations, you're allowed to be a kindergartner. So let's say, so for you, I was thinking with when it comes to mental health and medicine then, and we can even localize it to women's experiences, which are quite central here. If you could wave a wand and immediately change maybe like one or two things, a policy, an education, something happening, education, a rule about working in healthcare with the aim of improving healthcare worker mental health, what would be like one or two big changes you could make?
Ooh,
And you don't have to worry about politicians or anything because it's a thought
yeah.
experiment.
Yes, yes,
Figure out the how later.
yes. I think if I could wave a wand, I'll wave my Apple Pencil in the room. I would make it such that I think very on the nose, there should just be better policies so that women can decide how and when they want to have their children without all of these odd bureaucratic structures and reprimands that happen when we have our kids too close or when we delay or when, however it is. I wish that wasn't the case because if it were not for this rule where I have to work 600 hours in order to earn my next EI, I would try and start, you know, having our third right now. But the primary reason that I have to go back for a year is so that I can ensure that when I go on my next maternity leave, I don't feel the overwhelming pressure to work through it like I did with my last two, where I was keynoting from when my son turned 8 weeks and my
You're not
daughter
getting
was
any
3
support.
weeks.
You got to
Exactly.
make money, right?
I had to make money. And I love keynoting and I love being on the stage and I love all these things. But when I'm flying with a 3-month-old to Vancouver from Toronto on a 5-hour flight and she spikes a fever and I, you know, I'm struggling to get childcare in Vancouver to help me out while I'm on the stage, like these are things where it's like, I just want a little bit of breathing room. I just want a space where I can be a mom for a little bit and then a space where I can be a doctor for a little bit. Like, I just want certain things to be protected. So if I could wave a wand, that would be the wand.
All right, I'm writing this policy then because the policy is now, because let's, oh my gosh, it seems so like, hey, we need parents. Hey, we also need doctors. So like make it happen. So the policy tomorrow is any woman who is taking time to have a child, and I don't know, let's say, you know, let's give a year after, is taken care of at 100%
Yes.
of financial whatever we were at, and also is legally able to return to exactly
Yes.
where they were in their process from a year after their last child. How about that?
Yes. I love that. And also affordable childcare, because the prices for childcare in Toronto are mind-boggling. They
Yes,
are
we
mind.
are adding that childcare is free and government funded.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Sounds, yeah.
I love the sound of that. That should actually be the priority, because like, my goodness, childcare costs. Yeah. So,
Okay, our thought experiment shouldn't be, maybe we got to show what's possible, right?
yes,
I
exactly.
mean, motherhood, how do you think motherhood changed you?
In the best way. In
So
honestly,
you're in it right now, like just so you know, everyone, while speaking, you have not returned to residency yet, and you're like in the thick of it, right?
I am in the thick of it. I mean, I decided personally to extend my maternity leave another year. That was an act of reclaiming my time in my agency and exploring more of my career as a public speaker and my career as an author, as a writer, exploring all different kinds of opportunities outside of medicine. And I don't have any regrets about that. But motherhood has taught me profoundly that I am capable of much more than I ever could have thought I was capable of. And that's interesting, because prior to becoming a mom, I always thought that women shrunk in certain ways after becoming mothers, that you became almost weaker, like a shell of yourself, that all of your energy and time and demands, it all came to your children. There was nothing left for you. And that if you tried to do things for yourself, it was selfish. Like, I just thought that your universe contracted, when in fact it's the opposite. My universe has absolutely expanded, exploded. I think I am a better doctor, a way better writer, a much more compassionate human being, a much more authentic human being. I have a clarity of purpose. I have a clarity of insight in a way that I never had before. I wrote my book, the entire book from start to finish, over both of my maternity leaves. And it's some of my best writing, some of my best work. And I did that from when my son was 2 months old to when I finished the very final edit when my daughter was almost a year old. So I think that the absolute best version of myself has been unleashed since becoming a mother. And it's the most profound love I have ever felt in my life. They have taught me patience like I've never ever known. They've taught me the meaning of grace, of connectedness, of purpose. Like, it's just, they have given me, I mean, I hope to give them the world, but what I've learned from them is so much more than I can ever teach them. So I'm just so grateful to my babies.
Well, all I'm hearing is like another reason why this policy should exist, because maybe you'll actually have a better doctor come back.
Oh, you absolutely will. Honestly, I think that some of the best doctors are parents, because your compassion, your understanding of the fragility and the delicacy of life is completely changed forever.
Good way to word it.
Forever. Yeah.
Well, Chika, we're coming to the end here, so
Oh.
I wanted to give you, for a very thoughtful person, a quick thinking segment. So I'm going to walk you through
Okay.
some questions.
Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to do before we end is we'll do what's called train of thought. So that would be when we connect a theme from the last episode to a theme of this episode.
Oh, cool.
So first we shall do quick thinking.
Okay.
Now, I'm just going to fire off some rapid fire questions to you, and as much as you can, try to say, what comes top of mind first.
Okay.
Okay, firstly, if you could specialize in any other field of medicine, what would it be?
Obstetrics, gynecology.
Okay, that's fair. Favorite poet?
Maya Angelou.
Oh, that's a good one, too. One misconception about being a doctor?
That we always love our job 100% of the time.
The problem with quick thinking is that whenever I ask the questions, I always want to ask
more.
But okay, quick thinking. One lesson that you hope to pass to your children.
That they are worthy, full stop, no explanation.
Fine. One way you ensure your children feel connected to their heritage.
I am teaching them, well, my mom is teaching them our language, Igbo.
Oh. Mm-hmm. If you had to write a poem about where you are in life right now, what would the title be?
Azena and Nkiru.
Say more. That one might need an explanation.
Yeah, Azena is my son's name and Nkiru is my daughter's name.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one too. Okay. And finally, what is top Chika pick, best chai?
Ooh, slow. I think Sloan Tea Company. I'm pretty sure they have a chai. I love Sloan. If they don't have one, they need to get one. I'm pretty sure they would have one and it's bomb.
Okay, great. You passed some pretty big thinking in some pretty quick seconds. So
yes.
I end every episode with what's called train of thought, connecting some themes of the last episode to the themes of this one. Okay. So first, what I'll say is, what is one major theme or idea that you've taken from our chat?
I would say probably the biggest theme is like the resilience of women.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well then, I'm going to give you what she said was the theme of the last episode, and then your job will be to think what comes top of mind in that connection.
Okay.
She said that we are futurists and that we are creating a future that we would like to see because every day gives us the opportunity to practice our power.
Oh,
so I think it's kind of, let me word that again.
Yeah.
We are all futurists and we are creating the future that we would like to see. And every day gives us an opportunity to practice our power. So how in your mind does that connect to the resilience of all women?
Well, I think that without sounding too cliche, but the future is female, right? I think when we give women the ability, the resources, the support, the network, the finances to be able to be wholly actualized in our capacities, in our brilliance, in all of that, especially women of color. When we give them the space, then we know our capacity to change the world is going to be unbridled. And so when we think of it from this futuristic standpoint, and when we try to understand that we have to take the steps now in order to build the future that we want to see, a central part of that is that we need to rethink how it is that we engage and leverage and support the women around us. Because I think that will, women and little girls especially, I think that will unlock to us some of the biggest mysteries when it comes to how it is that we will protect our future and the future of our children.
Right. My general consensus as well is that you can judge a society based on how they treat their women and children. And that everyone would be taken care of if they were taken care of. That's a great way to end. Is there any last thoughts that you want to leave with people?
I would say that if this conversation has inspired you, that I think my memoir, unlike the rest, will probably inspire you in even further, and that it is a tale of one, but it's a book for all. And I would hope that any reader would feel inspired to read that. And so, yeah, and I just want to thank you so much for giving me the space, for letting me have another reason to have another cup of tea. It's been so wonderful. And yeah, I can't wait to chat again soon.
Thanks for listening, everyone.